Hi, I'm Deborah, and this video is about why I started cooking skinny. So I know a lot of the people who start cooking channels on YouTube do so because they're a chef or a diet guru of some kind. And I'm a little bit different. I am not a chef. The good part of that for you is that means that I'm not doing any fancy things that look super easy, and then when you try to replicate them, you can't, because it's not that easy. Because chefs do a lot of really cool stuff and they make it look so easy, and then it's not easy. The stuff on my channel is actually easy because the person doing it is not a chef. So I have a more specific reason. I started cooking skinny because I am a cardiac patient. That's right, cardiac since birth. So I've had a lifetime of trying to figure out how to eat. See, being a cardiac patient, I, for the entirety of my life, have had to worry about something that the medical field likes to call a comorbidity. Now, what a comorbidity is it's two separate conditions that compound each other in a negative way. So each condition, as separate as they may be, keep making the other condition worse. So with cardiac disease, the common comorbidity is obesity. They go hand in hand and they just work to make each other worse. When you have cardiac disease, you don't feel like doing a whole lot, which usually ends up in you gaining weight, which makes you feel like not doing a lot, which makes you gain more weight. And for a cardiac patient, every pound that you gain over weight increases cardiac risk. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I've never, ever asked my doctors what that means. I don't actually know what they mean by increased cardiac risk, but I took it to mean closer to death, and that's not a place I want to be. I don't want to be closer to death. So I have worked really hard my entire life to try and figure out how diet and exercise can work best for me. And for most of my life, I have failed at it miserably. I have not done well. I've gone by what's basically been out there in society, and it has not worked for me. So to give you a little bit of my history, I had my first open heart surgery when I was 22. And then from that surgery grew a lot of scar tissue. And that scar tissue caused what they call stenosis. And stenosis is like, blockage. The blood just can't get through the valve like it should. I have valvular disease. So with that stenosis, for the first time in my life, I ended up with something that I had never had before. I ended up with something called pulmonary hypertension. Now, pulmonary hypertension is not the hypertension that most people hear about. The hypertension you're probably familiar with is systemic hypertension, which is just high blood pressure. Pulmonary hypertension is different. It is increased pressures within the pulmonary artery from inside the heart. And it can be very, very serious and very dangerous. And one of the side effects of having a high pulmonary hypertension is fatigue. I mean, bad, severe fatigue. In that fatigue, I just didn't have the strength or the energy to go back to the gym again, because just like everyone else in our society, I went to the gym every day. Now, I can't do anything high impact, never been able to do anything high impact, but I still would walk the treadmill for half an hour or an hour, and that would take off, you know, 300-400 calories. And so I was able to stay reasonably within a healthy body weight by doing that. But then with the pulmonary hypertension, that was over. And I couldn't do it. I put on an additional 60 to 70 pounds. So I started doing what we all do. I started doing all of the popular diets in our society. I went carb-free, I went fat-free, I went gluten-free. My portions were tiny, I was starving, and I was still gaining weight. And I was miserable. I didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. I thought, this is it. I'm just going to keep gaining weight. These comorbidities are going to result in my morbidity. And I got really depressed. So I went up to my room and I got into bed and I started binge watching old movies because I really love old movies. And when I talk about old movies, I mean black and white movies, silent movies. Movies from the 80s are not old movies. They're just movies from the 80s. For those of you who've never ever watched a silent movie or a black and white movie, there's a little bit of a historical quirk that we still do today. So back when those movies were new movies in the theaters, they would have a newsreel and a sing-along cartoon at the beginning of the movie. Like how we have advertisements today, they had the sing-along cartoon and the newsreel back then. And so people would filter into the theater during the sing-along cartoon and the newsreel. So the newsreels were always about one of two things: the war or New Year's Eve at Times Square. So when I went to start binge watching the old movies that day, back in early 2015, the newsreel that came attached to the movie that I was watching was one of New Year's Eve in Times Square. So this was historical footage. And as the camera spanned out over the crowd in Times Square, everybody there was skinny. Every single person in that crowd was skinny. And I don't mean like not overweight. I mean like a size 2 skinny. And I thought, oh my God, what would a crowd in Times Square look like today? Would 100% of the crowd be thin like it was back in Grandma's generation? And I realized that no, it wouldn't. That probably half or more of the crowd would be overweight. And probably very, very few people in the crowd would be a size 2. Whereas that's what everyone was back in Grandma's generation. Now I did the elimination process. I went, oh, you know, it's because Grandma's generation was more active than our generation, because that's what everyone always says, right? Their generation was more active than our generation. No, they were not. Not at all. I sat down and I thought about the careers that were available for women back in Grandma's generation, and those careers were not massive. The careers were teacher, housewife, secretary, court stenographer, and telephone operator. Oh, and typist. Whew, can't forget the typist. But if you've noticed, all of those positions are sedentary to light work. None of them are strenuous. And yet that entire generation was thin. And I thought, well, they were more active outside of work. But the truth is back in Grandma's generation, gyms were not open to the general public. They were private institutions, and you had to have a membership to belong to one, and to become a member you had to be some kind of athlete. So you could not just be a regular person walking down the street, walk into a gym and get a membership. That's not how gyms worked back then. So nowadays, almost everybody belongs to a gym. Everybody's exercising. Everyone's doing yoga or bicycling or running or doing something, some kind of exercise. So Grandma's generation was not more active than our generation now. We're more active. And yet we continuously struggle with diet and weight loss strategies. So I realized, watching this video, I realized, oh my God, Grandma's generation was skinny because of the way they ate. It was their diet that made them skinny. It was 100% their diet. It wasn't exercise. It wasn't lifestyle. It was their diet. And so I got real inspired, and I have all these cookbooks that I inherited when my great aunt passed away. And so I decided to go down and get all those cookbooks and start cooking from them. And so I did that. I started cooking recipes out of those cookbooks, and I started eating those. And the most amazing thing happened. All of that weight that I put on, it just melted off. And I don't mean half a pound like they say today. I mean, it went away. It was magical. It was so incredible and so wonderful. I literally lost the 60, 70 pounds that I had put on in just a couple of months. That's it. Couple of months, and I lost the excess weight. One of the things that really struck me when I started getting into Grandma's generation recipes was that the portion size for the number of calories in the recipe was so much larger. The diets today have us eating like baby-sized portions of food. But the recipes that I cooked out of Grandma's cookbooks, I could eat 3, 4, 5, 6 times as much food for the same number of calories. I didn't have to starve to lose weight. I could eat like a human being, eat like a real person, and still lose weight. It was amazing. The second surprising thing that I noticed when I started cooking from Grandma's cookbooks was that most of the recipes were high in carbohydrates. High in carbohydrates, not low in carbohydrates. And I lost weight eating carbohydrates. Unfortunately, Grandma's cookbooks did have a drawback, and that drawback is that all of the recipes took like 4 hours to make. They took an exceeding amount of time, and that's just not realistic in our society. That's not realistic for you or me to spend that amount of time preparing food. I realized at that point that I needed to figure out what was fundamentally different between the way Grandma's generation prepared food and the way our generation prepared food. What were they doing that was right versus what we're doing now that is wrong? And I figured it out. See, in Grandma's generation, they ate a whole hell of a lot more plant-based foods than we eat today. And by plant-based foods, I mean fruits, I mean vegetables, I mean potatoes, I mean nuts, I mean berries, I mean everything that grows out of the ground except for grains. I noticed the amount of plant-based foods. The desserts were pies, they all had fruit in them. Even Jell-O had celery in it. Everything had so many fruits and vegetables in it. The plates that families would eat from always had some salad on it. It always had a fruit. It always had both. And this is the way that people ate for hundreds of years and never had a problem with weight. Then the mid-80s came, and you know what happened in the mid-80s? The mid-80s was the boom of convenience foods. So that's the microwavable foods, the freeze-dried foods, the fast food chains, the rise of the restaurant chains. All of those things are convenience food, and guess what doesn't do well in a convenience food environment? Plant-based foods. They don't freeze well, they don't freeze dry well, they take up a lot of room, and so in tiny fast food restaurants, they don't store well. So when we made the switch from home cooking for all of civilization to convenience foods in the mid-80s, we went as a society from eating about 50 to 75% of our diet in plant-based foods to then eating less than 5% of our diet in plant-based foods. And that is my theory for why we all started gaining weight and started having such a hard time just maintaining normal weight, a healthy weight. So I put this to the test, and I spent the next year doing nothing but eating that percentage, that 50 to 75% of my diet being plant-based foods, and cooking recipes and experimenting in the kitchen to that effect, and the weight stayed off. And anytime I want to lose weight, I just eat more plants instead of meats and other stuff. I just eat a lot more plants, and the weight comes off, and it comes off fast. It comes off immediately. I have spent my entire life counting calories, and once I figured this out, I didn't have any problems anymore. I didn't have any problems staying at a healthy weight. I don't count calories anymore. I haven't counted calories in probably a year. So when I figured this out, and when it worked so well for me, I decided that I was going to have to bring all of these recipes out to society. Because just like me, there's so many people out there in this world who are just really struggling with diet, struggling with maintaining a normal weight. There are people in my boat who don't have the ability to exercise. Either they have a chronic health condition and exercise is dangerous, or they have an injury and exercise can result in harm to the injured area. And in those scenarios, you have to rely on a diet-based solution. And I said, I have to bring this out. I have to take what I've learned and what I figured out and put it out there for everyone. To put out naturally low-calorie recipes that are healthy, that don't cut out any nutrients. No nutrient is forbidden on Cooking Skinny. Like, all nutrients welcome here. This is not a channel about cutting nutrients. And I wanted to be able to bring all of this out to people in a way that was easy, in a way that was no cost to the end consumer. I decided that YouTube was actually the best way to do that. It's the best way to get the word out. Now, I don't know how many people Cooking Skinny is going to work for, because you know, it's had a total trial of 1. This girl's the only one who's tried it, but it's been fantastically successful on this girl. So it might be successful on you. And I really won't know until other people start trying the recipes too. But I really hope that you guys enjoy these recipes. I hope that you find them appetizing. And just know that everything that I do here, everything that I do on Cooking Skinny, comes from my heart to yours.